Yo, what's going on guys, Jin here. This is an updated lightning spear guide and overall build. It can clear tier 8 hordes in about 13 minutes on average, tier 130 plus pits without any greater affixes or min-maxing required, and only requires one uber unique as mandatory. For the basic version of the build you can check out my previous lightning spear video that'll be linked in the description below. I'll also answer a few questions here that came up in that video. So if you like these build guides, please leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a comment as it helps out a lot, and I really appreciate it. Thanks again, let's get to the build. So for the skill tree, again, this build will require one uber unique, and that would be a Harlequin crest as you can see. So if you don't have that, check out my previous video. So we're going to start with 2 into Firebolt, then come down to our core skills, and we're going to take 1 into Chain Lightning and go for Destructive Chain Lightning. Then we're going to take 1 into Charge Bolts and go for Destructive Charge Bolts. Next in our defensive skills, we're going to be taking 5 into Teleport and going for the Shimmering Teleport, 3 into Glass Cannon, 1 into Elemental Attunement, 1 into Ice Armor, and go for Shimmering Ice Armor. In our Conjuration skills, we're going to take 3 into Precision Magic, 1 into Ice Blades, go for the Summoned Ice Blades, 1 into Lightning Spear, and go for Invoked Lightning Spear, go for 3 in Conjuration Mastery, 3 in Align the Elements, 3 in Protection, and 3 into Mana Shield. Then in our Mastery skills, we're taking 1 into Inner Flames, and 3 into Devouring Blaze. Then we come down to our ultimate skills, taking 1 into Permafrost, and 3 into Hoarfrost. Then we're also going to take 1 into Coursing Currents, and 3 into Electrocution. And then for our key passive, we're going to be taking Overflowing Energy. So next up we have the Paragon Board. So for the Paragon Board, we're going to be using Elementalist as our first glyph. So dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage to an enemy increases all damage we deal to them by 5% for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. For our second board, we're using the Enchantment Master board. And we're going to be putting in the Unleash glyph here, so after spending 50 mana, you deal 8% increased damage and gain 25% mana regen for 3 seconds. For our third board, we're going to go for the Burning Instinct board, and for the glyph, we're going to go for Tactician, so we deal 10% increased damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive skill. Duration increased by 4 seconds for each defensive skill not on the action bar. For our fourth board, we're going to go for Ceaseless Conduit, and put in the Destruction glyph here, so that gives us critical strike damage, and critical strikes increase all damage the enemy takes from us by 2% for 10 seconds, up to 12%. For our fifth board, we're taking Frigid Fate, making sure we get the legendary node, so we'll deal bonus to vulnerable enemies equal to 20% of the total amount of our bonus damage with cold, up to a max of 60%. For the glyph, we're using Conjure Up, that gives us conjuration damage, but more importantly, the conjuration skills have 20% increased duration. For our sixth board, we're going to be going for the Searing Heat board, and for the glyph, we're going to be using Exploit, so that gives us vulnerable damage, and dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases damage by 1% for 6 seconds, up to 10%. Up from there, our seventh board, we're going to be going for Elemental Summoner, so our conjuration skills have 10% reduced cooldown or mana cost. They also deal bonus damage equal to 10% of the total amount of our bonus damage with fire, lightning, and cold, up to 60%. For the glyph, we're going to be using Charge, that gives us crackling energy damage, but more importantly, picking up crackling energy grants us 5% increased damage for 5 seconds, and that will stack up to 15%. For our 8th and final board, it will be above our 5th board, the Frigid Fate board, and that will be the Static Surge board. And we're going to put in the Flame Feeder glyph here, so damage to burning enemies, but also we deal 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. So basically the same board as the previous build. All of this will be in the build planner in the description below, so make sure you check that out. Next up we have the enchantments. we're going to be using Firebolt as our first enchantment, so direct damage from skills applies burning damage to proc our Devouring Blaze and Flame Feeder. And for our second enchantment we're going to be using Ice Blades. So basically the more cooldowns we use, the more Ice Blades we summon. And in turn the Ice Blades will lower the cooldown of our other skills. So for the gear, I'm not going to list too many alternatives. If you want the basic version of the build, that will be linked in the description below. So starting with the Helm, we're going to be going for a Harlequin Crest or Shaco here. And we're going to be trying to masterwork the cooldown reduction. You want to get as much cooldown reduction as possible for your Unstable Currents, and of course your Lightning Spear. Next up we have the chestpiece. We're going for a normal chestpiece with max life, mana per second, and defensive skills. We're going to temper that with ranks into Warmth and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. As for the aspect, we'll go with the aspect of concentration. So casting a conjuration skill grants you 15 to 25% damage reduction for 5 seconds. And for the masterworking, you would masterwork the max life. As another option, but totally not mandatory, you could use Tyrael's Might here, and for this you would masterwork the damage reduction. For the gloves, we're just using normal gloves with attack speed, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, and we're tempering that with critical strike damage and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. As for the aspect, we're going to be using Frozen Orbit, so Frozen Orb explodes 2 additional times at its destination for 45 to 60% of its damage. This is going to help us out a lot with our cooldown reduction for our conjuration skills, aka our Lightning Spear, because of our Fractured Winter Glass. And for the masterworking, we'll masterwork the critical strike chance if possible. For the pants, we're going for Tybalt's Will, pretty straightforward. We want that aspect that gives us 10 to 20% increased damage while unstoppable and for 5 seconds after. And when we become unstoppable, we gain 50 of our primary resource. As for the masterworking, you're going to try and masterwork the max life here. Next for the boots, we've got Esu's Heirloom. Again for the unique aspect, critical strike chance is increased by 20 to 40% of our movement speed bonus. This is what's going to allow us to get our critical strike chance base to be at 85%, making us have 100% critical strike chance with our Lightning Spear, as that has 15% critical strike chance built in. So for the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork that critical strike damage here. Next up, our weapon. We're going to be using a staff here, and we're going to look for intelligence, damage, and critical strike damage. As for the tempering, we'll temper that with critical strike damage, and chance for a second Lightning Spear when cast. As for the aspect, we're going for splintering energy, of course. This is where all the damage comes from. So critical hits with Lightning Spear cause lightning to arc from it, dealing damage to its target and up to 5 other enemies, and this damage is increased by our critical strike damage bonus. That's why we want our critical strike chance high, and as much critical damage as possible. So for our masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork 2 into our critical strike damage. Make sure you do that on the tempered critical strike damage, as it's a far larger number, as you can see. And for chance for a second Lightning Spear, we're going to try and masterwork that once. So if you get a good roll on that, that will put that above 100%, so meaning every Lightning Spear you cast, you'll cast a second Lightning Spear. Next up, we have the Amulet. We're going to be using Fractured Winter Glass, of course. And we're going to try and masterwork the conjuration cooldowns are reduced when a Frozen Orb explodes. So you want to try and get this at 0.3 on your base, or if you can get a Greater Affix, even better. Additionally, you want to get a Winter Glass with a high aspect, of course, as that makes a huge difference to the amount of conjurations you can have, and in turn the amount of mana you are regenerating, as each conjuration you have active will give you an extra stack of conjuration mastery. Next for the ring, we want a ring with critical strike chance, attack speed, and critical strike damage. As you can see, I have intelligence instead of critical strike damage, so make sure you get critical strike damage instead of intelligence when possible. As for the tempering, you're going to temper this with Lightning Spear cooldown reduction, again trying to get that Lightning Spear cooldown as low as possible, preferably under 5.1, that would be the end goal of this build. as that will allow you to spam insane amounts of lightning spear. For our second temper, we'll use critical strike damage. As for the masterworking, obviously we're masterworking the lightning spear cooldown reduction. And for the aspect, we're going to be using Storm Swell, so we deal 15 to 30% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while we have a barrier. For our second ring, we're using Talrash's Iridescent Loop, and we're going to try and masterwork the cooldown reduction. And as for the unique aspect, for each type of elemental damage we deal, gain 10 to 20% increased damage for 4 seconds, stacking up to 40 to 80%, and dealing any elemental damage refreshes all bonuses. Alternatively, you can use a second of those rings with attack speed, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage, and temper it the exact same way, lightning spear cooldown reduction, and critical strike damage. The only difference would be you would use the aspect of shredding blades, so Ice Blade's chance to apply vulnerables increased by 20%, and that vulnerable durations increased by 4 seconds. You also gain 15 to 30% vulnerable damage. So either of those two rings is fine. If you're going to reach that 5.1 second breakpoint for your lightning spear cooldown, then this ring would be a lot stronger than the Talrash's, again, as it would allow you to spam your lightning spear. So that's it for the gear. For the gems, we're going to be using skulls in the jewellery, emeralds in the weapon, and topazes in the armour. You could use rubies in the armour if you want that extra tankiness from the max life, but I prefer the topazes for the intelligence and therefore the damage. Next up, I'll just answer a few questions that I got a lot in the previous video. A lot of people were wondering why we took charge bolts even though we don't use the enchantment or use the spell at all. And the same thing would apply to chain lightning. These two abilities will proc whenever we have unstable current active and we use a shock skill, which is lightning spear, or teleport. So once unstable current is on and we use a shock skill, it has a chance to cast another shock skill, which will be either ball lightning, charge bolts, lightning spear, or chain lightning, and that is when these will proc. So a lot of people have asked why they are running out of mana with this build. The answer most likely is you would need a better Winterglass aspect. With my aspect, for example, Frozen Orb has a 64% chance to cast a Conjuration when it explodes. In turn, my Conjuration Mastery is level 9. That means I also get 18% extra mana regeneration per active Conjuration. So this aspect being rolled high is a big part of the mana problem solution. Additionally, you can use Teleport or Flame Shield when you're low on mana, as when you become unstoppable, you gain 50 base primary resource thanks to Tybalt's Will. Also, when you begin a fight, you can cast Ice Armor to get 30% more mana regeneration right off the bat whilst you build up your Conjuration numbers. If you're really having issues with mana, then you would remove 2 or 3 points from Teleport and put them into Fiery Surge. So doing some or all of those things will definitely solve your mana issues. And if you get high enough cooldown, you don't need mana per second at all. So that pretty much wraps up this build. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, as it really helps out the channel a lot, and I really appreciate it. And if you feel like it, leave a comment down in the comment section below. So thanks a lot for watching once again, and hope to see you in the next video. Bye.